Hey guys, Max Rich here, and today I want to talk about the importance of your thumb position because it's really one of the most important things that you can get under control as a guitar player. Alright guys, if you like these kind of videos and you like learning about technique and how your anatomy can affect your technique and how to optimize your anatomy for guitar, then please like, share, and subscribe, ding that notification bell, share with your friends, tell people about this, and ultimately I would like to hear from you. So if you can, comment in the comment section down below, let me know how these tips are going for you, and take a look at maxrichmusic.com/newsletter to find a lot more free information and a lot of free content that I put out only over there. Some of the stuff makes it to YouTube, but not everything, so give that a check, and here we go. So, the important thing with your thumb is that number one, it is the balancing act of your hand. It controls the left-right balance as well as the up-down balance of your hand. What do I mean by that? Well, basically, whatever you're playing, it's going to be spanning a couple frets, 2, 3, 4 frets, sometimes 5, sometimes even 6 frets. But whatever you're playing, for example, a pentatonic scale spans 4 frets. I'm going, let's say, from the 5th fret to the 8th fret. Now, if I do that correctly, my thumb is in the middle of my hand. It's directly behind all 4 of those frets. It's not behind my index finger, it's not behind my pinky, it's not to one side or the other. That's a hugely important thing to become proficient at as a guitar player, because the thumb, like I said, is the balancing act. And if you have it too heavy, let's say on the index side, what's going to end up happening is you're going to end up pushing really hard with the index finger, and you're not going to have very much of a reach or very much power with your pinky. I'm sure a lot of you players out there kind of find yourself doing this, where it's like maybe hard to reach with your pinky, or it's maybe hard to do like trills with your pinky, you know, that kind of a thing. Most likely the reason is that your thumb is too far towards the headstock. If my thumb is too far towards the headstock, moving in this direction towards the body becomes really difficult because it's pulling all the weight in my hand that way. Just as if it's right here behind my pinky, reaching with my index finger in that direction becomes really difficult. To counteract that, what you need is to have your thumb behind the exact center of your hand. So once again, if I'm playing the pentatonic scale, my thumb is behind the 6th fret because that's right in between my middle and ring finger. Now you notice I could play like this with a diagonal position, I could play with a vertical position. My thumb doesn't move. Regardless of what I'm playing, if I'm shifting up and down the neck, it's staying in the center of my hand. If you notice, like my thumb, I mean, I'm just messing around, but my thumb is pretty much always in the center of my hand. Now, this might become a bit of an issue for a lot of players, getting your hand to stop being like this and being more like this. Essentially what needs to happen is you need to control the angle of your wrist and the vertical placement of your thumb. That's really important. So one thing happens when you start trying to play with the vertical placement of your thumb, right? That controls the angle of your wrist and how it attacks the guitar. Whether you're sitting like this or with your neck elevated, the thumb placement does the same thing. It controls your wrist, basically. Now, if you look at my thumb right now, it's towards the upper end of the back of the neck. If I drop my thumb down, look what happens to my wrist. My wrist starts bending at this like 90-degree angle, and this is something I see from a lot of players. They kind of reach down underneath in order to play with like, they attempt to play with curved fingers, and as a consequence, they end up with that super bent wrist, which is a major problem. Why is that bent wrist such a huge problem? Well, take your hand, stick it up in the air like this. Wiggle your fingers all over the place. They can move freely, just fine. Now, lock your wrist down at 90 degrees and try doing the same thing. You have way less range of motion. And that's because the tendons that run from your forearm all the way up into your fingers are stretched to their maximum degree when your hand is like this. So they're stretched as completely as they can go, and they really can't do much else. Like, your fingers are locked in place. So when you're playing out here with your wrist shoved forward and your thumb way down, you're really limiting what you can do with your fingers. And I'm sure you know that because you try to play something and you try to play something relatively complex and it becomes really hard. Consequently, the opposite is true too. If you take your thumb and you move it up the neck, you get not exactly a flat wrist, but sort of like a bent wrist in the opposite direction. Take a look at what happens when I move my wrist to the top. My wrist bends, but it bends in the opposite way, right? Now this is way less of a problem. As you notice, I can still move my fingers freely and clearly much more than I can with this, right? So if you are going to err on one side, err on this side. Now if you're playing classical guitar or you're doing some, complex sort of thing that requires you to be like this, maybe you're doing something like this and you have no choice but to do that, that's understandable. However, your body position also matters, where you keep the guitar. If you keep the guitar way down low like this, you had better be playing with your thumb over the top, because if not, you're going to be doing like this, you're going to be playing like this, your shoulder's going to be dropped, your back is going to be curved, and your thumb is going to be at the bottom, and you're going to be playing with these really awkward straight fingers with very little mobility. So a couple things you definitely want to keep in mind is that your thumb should be in the center of your hand regardless of what you're doing, so it can control the balance. The pressure needs to be the same between your index finger and your pinky side. You can't be pressing hard on your index and have very little power on your pinky, or vice versa. Now this is much less common among players. This is really common where players play like this, right? And as a consequence, they can really do a lot of stuff with their index and virtually nothing with their pinky. That's because all the weight of their hand is on their index side. So don't be that guy, be this guy. Play in the center of your hand. Even if you want to play angled fingers or straight fingers, I really don't care. But I have my own personal preference, but we'll leave that aside. For you, I would suggest the number one thing to focus on is whatever lick, whatever song you're practicing, keep your thumb in the center. See if you can do that. It'll be awkward and it'll be difficult at first, but it's something that you need to get the hang of. And essentially it comes down to either this, which you don't want, or this, which you do want. This is how you want to play. Regardless of the vertical, the left and right, your thumb should be in the center. And as far as the vertical is concerned, you want to be playing with a straight wrist. And as far as a straight wrist is concerned, take a look at this, right? That is a straight wrist. This is not straight, and that's not straight. That is straight. Now, the reason I want a straight wrist is so that I have ultimate maximum mobility in my fingers in every direction. If I bend my hand too far like this, I have very limited mobility. If I bend it like this, I have more mobility, but it's still somewhat limited. If I keep my wrist straight, then I have maximum mobility. My tendons of my forearm on the underside or the top side aren't stretching. So I don't need to worry about decreased mobility. I have maximum freedom to move my fingers wherever I want to. So the ultimate takeaway from this is keep your thumb in the center of your hand and keep your wrist straight. If you do those two things, you're going to free up your hand to be able to play with more finger independence, more mobility, and ultimately more freedom. Because when you get right down to it, as you progress as a guitar player, things become harder because you want to learn cooler licks, you want to learn harder licks, you want to learn more challenging stuff. The more challenging stuff you want to play, the better your technique has to be to accommodate for that. You can't play with the same technique that you started with and expect to get better. You have to improve the technique.